Welcome friends to another r/NuclearRevenge video. Today we've got a great story of revenge against a backstabbing ex. That said, our first story of the day is the big audition. 2 years ago, my roommate of 2 years told me he was moving out. It was expected since he had just gotten engaged to his high school sweetheart, and I knew they would want to move in together to a bigger place. I was excited for them, but super bummed about him leaving. He was the best roommate ever and was almost like my brother. We had so much fun living together. Before he moved out, I posted on a site that I was looking for a roommate. I wanted to carefully choose a roommate as I've read so many stories about bad roommates, and I didn't want any drama. I wanted someone like my former roommate, very respectful of my privacy and caring at the same time. He took ensuring the apartment was safe very seriously and was clean to a fault. I especially liked that he took security measures very seriously. You see, back in college, my roommates and I were robbed by a guy one of us had brought home from a party. The robber had a gun to my head and made me lie on the floor, my face to the ground. The three of us were traumatized by the incident and went home for a while. I've been extra anxious ever since. It's been getting better though, but I still get pretty anxious about having strangers in my home. When I told my former roommate about my experience, he was quite understanding about my plight, and he promised to never bring in anyone who would compromise the safety of our home. I got many responses, interviewed 4 people, and was very satisfied with one. She had just graduated college and had parents who were going to pay her rent for a year until she found her feet, and had also just been offered a job in my city, so it all made sense. All was going according to plan until she called to say that she had gotten a better apartment and offer. I was very disappointed, tired, and uninterested in going through the tedious process of interviewing people all over again. At the time, my guy roommate had moved out. I spoke to the person who I preferred after her, and she had also gotten another offer. I was left with another person whom I'd interviewed too. She works as a waitress at a restaurant and was also an actress. She was working as a waitress while waiting for her big break in Hollywood. She excitedly decided she would be my roommate. We met later and talked. Afterward, she paid rent and moved in that same week. My roommate was very outgoing and partied a lot, and she had a lot of fun. I work from home, so more often than not, I was in the house. I only leave the house whenever I want a different environment to work in, and usually I go to a local coffee shop in the area. My roommate was hardly ever home. She always had to go to work, had a date, a party, or an audition to go for. We barely had time to talk and get to know each other personally, but so far we were good roommates to each other. All was going well until she started to date a very weird-looking dude with a strange, intimidating character. Her boyfriend hardly ever said anything to me. My roommate was barely around, but he mostly was and would simply perch around wherever I was in the house without ever speaking to me. I tried several times to get all chummy with him and start a conversation, but he would just mumble an incoherent response, and sometimes he would just ignore me when I speak to him. He barely even replied to my greeting. My roommate said he was an actor like her, but I'd never seen him go for an audition like my roommate. He was always in the house, watching TV, eating food from the fridge, and taking endless naps, most times on the living room couch. My roommate and her boyfriend started to organize parties every Friday in the living room. I was worried and asked her why her parties were so frequent. "We're in the show business," my roommate said. "We need to organize parties and find ways to socialize and expand our network." I was confused. She rolled her eyes. "Well, I don't expect you to get it." I ignored her subtle jab at the quiet life I led and let it go. Every Saturday morning, the kitchen and living room would be very dirty, and I would clean with my roommate, never mind the fact that I was never really invited to the parties. Her boyfriend never cleaned with us too. One Friday night, I was out on a date, and I returned home quite late. As usual, my roommate and her boyfriend were hosting one of their parties, but this time there was a large table, some game going on, and a large stack of cash. I knew immediately that they were gambling. Of course, it didn't go well with me that my roommate's boyfriend had turned my home into a gambling house. I decided to speak to her about it, but I couldn't find her, so I walked up to her boyfriend, tapped him on the shoulder, and asked to speak with him privately. He looked at where I touched them as though an irritating fly had perched on his arm and frowned. "What is it?" he yelled over the loud music. "I need to talk to you," I yelled back. He walked out with me to the kitchen, and it was noisy in there too. I signaled for him to come with me. We went out through the kitchen door, and I tried to control my anger. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "You got a problem?" He looked very uninterested in what I was saying. "What do you mean I got a problem?" "Of course I've got a problem. Is this even legal?" He yawned. "Listen, nerd, we're all just having a little bit of adult fun. Stop making a big deal out of all these." He left me standing outside. I was too upset to go back in, so I called my friend to ask if I could spend the night at hers, and she agreed. The next morning, I was back in my home, and it stank. It was too messy. My roommate wasn't home to clean up the party's mess, and her boyfriend was probably waiting for her to return home and clean. I was beyond disgusted. I packed a few things in my computer and went back to my friends. My friend thought it was unfair for me to have to leave my own house because of the mess he had created. They said next time, just call the police on them. I'd consider that, but I didn't want to be a party pooper. I went to parties in high school, and my friends and I hated when someone tried to ruin our fun. "I'm going to have to speak to her about this when she returns," I said. "Girl, if you don't, I will." My friend was annoyed. I went back home 2 days later. My roommate was in the kitchen filling the fridge with groceries she had just bought. "Hey," she smiled weakly at me. I told her we needed to talk, and then went on to tell her about what happened on Friday. I told her I was not comfortable with having gamblers in my house, and I guess that angered her. "It's my house too," she exclaimed. "I know, but this sort of activity attracts the wrong people. We can never be too careful." I also told her that I could no longer handle seeing my house filled with dirt every Saturday. I was tired of cleaning after grown-ups. She stopped replying and just kept opening cartons and filling up the fridge. I waited for her to say something, to promise to make her boyfriend stop, but she didn't. My roommate and her boyfriend stopped speaking to me altogether, and quite frankly, I didn't care. As long as they no longer used my house as a casino and turned it into an irritating mess the next day. That Friday, the annoying couple didn't have a party, and I was glad. Imagine my joy not waking up to a disgusting kitchen. I was glad. They still weren't speaking to me, and I still didn't care. I honestly thought it was all over until the next Friday. There was no loud music, just strange guys playing poker in the living room. I was enraged. I was more tolerant of the party because I thought it wasn't so harmful, but I could never tolerate weekly gambling in my house. Not after what happened in college. I walked in the living room and threatened to call the police. My roommate and her boyfriend were livid when their company left. "She's just mad because she has a boring life," she said to her boyfriend, but loud enough for me to hear in the kitchen. I ignored her because there was no point arguing. I'd gotten what I wanted anyway. "Boring, boring life," she yelled from the living room. I ignored her still. I knew if I engaged her, we would have a really big fight. I could be very mean too, but I try not to show the mean side of me till I've been pushed to the wall. I was starting to miss my parents, so I bought tickets to fly to Texas. I'd been planning a trip back home for a while, but work always got in the way. I was due to travel the next day, but I didn't want to leave things the way they were with my roommate. I knocked on her room's door to speak with her. I told her about what happened in college and how that made me very wary of having strangers in my home. Her demeanor softened, and she apologized and promised that they were never going to do what happened ever again. On my way out of the house, I saw her boyfriend smiling sheepishly. He looked happy to see me go. I sincerely hoped that she and her boyfriend would not do anything silly, and trusted that she would keep her promise and stop the in-house gambling. I spent 5 days in my parents' home, and we talked about everything and everyone, including my roommate and her boyfriend. My mom insisted on letting her go and getting a new roommate. I resisted though. My roommate and I are cool now. I told her what happened in college anyway, and she now understood why I was super concerned about our safety. I was certain that she and I would have no problems ever again, but I was wrong. I returned to LA on Sunday, and the kitchen and living room were a mess. It was all in an irritating state. I stared at the filth before me for so long before moving to my bedroom. I was horrified to see my bedroom door slightly open. I was certain that I didn't leave it open. I would lock my bedroom door when I'm out of the house. I always did that. I walked into my room, and it was then I realized what had happened. I had been burgled. Someone had broken the lock and ransacked my room. My closet was wide open, and all my stuff was on the floor. Clothes, hangers, makeup, and all others. My designer bags and eyeglasses were gone. I had a small wad of cash and a tiny purse, and it was gone too. I broke down in tears. The evil couple I lived with did not hear me because they were probably asleep after bringing Las Vegas to my apartment. My friend was out of town. I could have called her to come over because I needed someone to hold me down so I don't physically attack my roommate. I heard someone in the kitchen and went in to see my roommate cleaning the kitchen, collecting plastic bags and bottles from the floor. She smiled sheepishly when she saw me. "Sorry, my boyfriend could not resist having a party while you were away." Her mouth flew open when I told her that my room was broken into. "Please don't call the police," was the first thing she said. She never apologized and she did not look sorry. My mom thought I was crazy because I decided not to call the police. I, however, told my roommate that her boyfriend had to leave my house if she wanted me to leave the police out of it. "Why do you have to be such a witch?" she yelled. I ignored her and left for my room to put things in order. Not once did my roommate apologize for my stolen stuff, offer to help clean my room, or even ask about what was missing. She only promised to send her boyfriend away. I was not satisfied with that at all. I knew I was going to get my revenge, and I patiently waited for the right time to carry out my revenge. Her boyfriend did leave, and our relationship improved. 3 weeks later, I heard her screaming excitedly on the phone. From the conversation, she had been invited to the final stage of an audition for a lead role in a movie the next day. She was visibly over the moon with excitement, and even mentioned that she knew one of the judges and she could feel that this was going to be her big break. I knew then that it was my chance to get back at her. I was working in the kitchen when she came bearing fruits and smiling. I initiated a friendly chat about how I was considering getting a dog while she blended her fruits for a smoothie. When she was done with the blending, she kept the smoothie in the fridge. I went to my room and picked a laxative medicine I'd used for constipation a month ago and emptied it into her smoothie. She came to the kitchen a few times to pick some stuff up, but never drank her smoothie. I was worried that my plan would fall through. Well, luck smiled on me. I'd gone to bed later that night, but my roommate woke up at midnight and drank her smoothie. Of course, she got diarrhea and spent quality time in the toilet all through the day. I sat in the living room with a big smile on my face, feeling very compensated for my missing items. Oblivious of what I'd done, she came to the living room to talk to me about her condition. I smiled and said, "Please don't call the police." Yes, she missed her big audition. I'm just thinking about myself in OP's shoes, and I would be miserable living in that scenario. Even if these people were coming over and weren't gambling, I'm so comfortable being by myself that I would hate every single week having this group of people come around. Especially considering you have to rely that your roommate and their boyfriend watch all the items of the house, so nobody steals or goes rifling through anything. When there's 2 roommates in a house, do you think it's unreasonable for one of the roommates to bring over groups of people that the other doesn't know at least once a week? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Our next story is my revenge against my horrible racist boss. A thread on horrible bosses? Count me in. I have the experience to share, and it hasn't even been that long since it happened. For context, I'm a 21-year-old African-American male, and I stand at 6 feet 3 inches. I've always been one of the tallest people in my class, and I also have very dark skin, so it's pretty normal for me to be the center of attention. Ever since I was a child, I've always been a pretty calm person. So it's quite common to meet people who think that it's an easy way to walk all over me. It's always fun to witness and even funnier when I prove them wrong. I started modeling 3 years ago when I just turned 18, and because I've got a very peculiar look, I hit it off almost right away. They weren't big jobs that paid a lot because, unlike a lot of models, I didn't start with an agency, and I had to work freelance for a little over a year, taking on small gigs and a lot of free work to build my portfolio to a standard that I thought was good enough. At 19, I finally decided to work with my first agency. I won't say their name here, but they were a smaller agency in my hometown, and I'll admit that they were very helpful in building my modeling career. The only issue that I ever really had was the fact that I really wanted to do editorial modeling, but I was stuck with commercial and fitness modeling, which was ironic because I didn't even work out. I worked with the agency for another year and a half, and I made a ton of friendships and connections that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. One of them in particular was a gorgeous redhead, we'll call her R. Both of us were the youngest models in the agency, so naturally we gravitated toward each other. I enjoyed how quiet she was, much like me, but she could also transform into a whole new person when the both of us were alone. I also admired how she also knew when to speak up for herself and others. She was pretty brave, despite being really petite and standing at 5'5" as one of the smallest models in the agency. In modeling, sometimes there can be bullying and intimidation from older models or people who have generally been in the business for long, and I encountered these kinds of people all the time. I chose to ignore it, but R did quite the opposite. Soon, it made a lot of people respect us even more and stay out of our way. When they walked together, it looked like I, the much larger person, was being guided by a red-haired walking ball of unbridled rage. Another thing I liked about R was the fact that she was very motivating. After graduating high school, I paused all of my intentions of going to college because of financial difficulties. Em and I worked another job as a virtual assistant to help with my bills. She worked at her parents' restaurant as a waitress and receptionist, and occasionally she cooked too. She also went to community college part-time, which motivated me a lot. Still, she was the one who knew about new opportunities the moment they came out. She always alerted me and dragged me along for as many as we could afford to go for. Casting calls, photography, and modeling events, the whole shebang. It also proved to be very strengthening for our relationship because we seemed to get much closer. Eventually, the hard work paid off because we were both scouted by a huge modeling agency in New York. It worked with some of the most popular models in the fashion scene, and we were so excited. It was also a bonus that we were the first ever models from our small town agency to be accepted into one as big as the one in New York. R had a field day watching the expressions of people who didn't like us change when it was announced a day before we had to leave. Our trip to New York was sponsored by the new agency, as well as the hotel we would be staying at while looking for a more permanent residency. It was a no-brainer that we would end up as roommates because she was now basically my best friend. And New York was a really expensive place. Too expensive for either of us to live alone. We got a place after 3 weeks of living in a hotel and going to photo shoots and fittings every single day. And we finally moved into a nice place in Manhattan. Although it does depend on what you consider nice. For us, nice meant that there was just one rat instead of an entire family of a million other rodents, like we usually heard about. We even named the rat Johnny, but I digress. We'd been in New York for about a month before we were finally able to meet the agents that were assigned specially to us. R got a lovely African-American woman with the loveliest smile, while I got a snooty blonde man that smoked like a train. We'll call him D because he was a massive D-bag. As I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty easygoing and can work with anyone, so unless there's a real problem that requires me to step back and assess the situation, I don't really care for it. I didn't have any issues with my agent in the beginning, mainly because the agency had already sent me a couple of guidelines and basic information that I needed to know. And I knew that agents usually had more than one model to attend to, so I read everything thoroughly to make sure that I didn't make my agent stress himself too hard on me. The red flag started to pop up when I went in for a fitting for a show that I was supposed to walk in 2 days, and I found out that I was getting paid less than the other models. 2 of them were having a conversation about how they would spend their paychecks, and I overheard the amount. It was 4 times my own. I knew this because the agents usually let us know the payment for each job, in case we want to decline it. Usually I don't talk to other models first unless they initiate a conversation or approach me, because I'm just really quiet and shy. But I had to speak to them so that I could confirm if their agency got paid more. It turned out that one of them actually belonged to the same agency as me, so I worked out that there had to be a mistake on my end. Right after the fitting, I spoke to my agent and let him know what I'd found out. He basically laughed at me over the phone and basically told me that I was being paid less because of how dark my skin was. I was very hurt by his words, but he acted like he was the nice guy, assuring me that we would figure out something else together. I was down for the rest of the day and R noticed, but I covered it up with exhaustion. Over the next couple of months, it felt like my growth was being stilted with my agent. I got lower paying jobs than R or any of the other new model friends I'd made, and they were usually very forgettable ones. Nothing as exciting as a runway or editorial or even catalog modeling. I sometimes did old, boring company advertisements. And at a point, I even went back to fitness modeling. The worst kind of modeling for me. Being a model is stressful enough as it is, but doing a style that you're not comfortable with, nor enjoying, is even more draining. I started to feel less than my other friends and even started to decline to go out with them. I stayed cooped up in my room, researching what jobs I could apply for with only a high school degree because modeling didn't seem to be working for me anymore. R noticed this and she tried to get me out of my slump for a bit. She was at the peak of her career and actually thriving, and I didn't want to bring her down, so I pretended to be down with the flu. Eventually, she caught me in my own lie and demanded that we spend a night in. We did some skincare, her idea, ate loads of Chinese food, drank wine, and just talked. I let her know everything that had been going on, and she told me that she'd had suspicions about my agent D. I personally didn't think it was his fault. It just felt like I was unlucky and this wasn't the job field for me anymore. R assured me the best she could and gave me some motivational words. By the end of the night, I felt much better about myself and my situation. For the next month, there was no improvement work-wise, but at least I had enough work to pay my basic bills. That was until R got her own agent to pull some strings and get us in a shoot together. Since moving, we'd not worked together on any set, so it was nice to get to work with my best friend one more time. It was a great time, and we got lunch afterward because it was for a pretty big fashion house and I wanted to celebrate. R just wanted bottomless mimosas. During lunch, I went to the bathroom and coincidentally ran into one of the models from the same set crying. There was some familiarity, so I inquired about the problem. And he told me that his agent just told him that the company hated his work and that he wouldn't get paid. I felt bad for him, especially since I could personally relate to what he was feeling. I assured him that these things did happen sometimes and that they would only get better. Towards the end of our conversation, I asked him about his agency and wanted to know who his agent was. And he told me that it was the same one I had. His agent was D. Suddenly, nothing felt right about the situation. I parted with him and went back to the table, immediately asking R what she thought of the situation. She informed me that it was way too soon to know that kind of information, and if the company didn't like the shoot, they would just call for a reshoot. This was the moment when we both realized that there was something wrong. R was very good at snooping, and she also had a very nice agent who helped her find out most of the people that were under D. She sent out emails to each of them and somehow got them to rant about D. They all said the same things. He didn't pay them properly, was either racist, sexist, or just downright inappropriate around them. To some, he was all three. He overworked a few of them and sent them off without being paid at all, but they had no idea who to talk to because he was literally their boss. As we read through the emails, I had the idea to compile them into a single file and send them to the very heads of the company. But R had the idea to screw him up a little before we would go that far. We informed the 5 other agents, and they were very much on board with the plan. We did the basic high school things like egging his house and breaking his windows. We scratched his cars badly and lessened his tires. R even went as far as putting water in his engine, and then a salt and sugar concoction. It made things funnier when we found out that he couldn't actually go and report to the police because he had a few assault cases on his tab, and he was basically hiding from the police. After 2 weeks of continuously tormenting him, we decided to give him a small break, as he would soon lose his job. R's birthday came up and we threw a dinner party at our apartment. She invited people from our agency to show up, and unfortunately, D showed up. Everyone was visibly uncomfortable when he came, but he didn't let it derail him from being weird. He drank a lot and tried numerous times to get into our rooms, nearly hitting R when she tried to stand up to him. We kicked him out of our apartment, and that night, we decided to send the email to the board in charge of the agency as a whole. It was so stressful waiting for a response from the team, which came about a month later. But when it did, there were a lot of apologies and promises to look into the case. They worked fast because within 2 days, D's name had been cleared from the entire agency's system. It was almost like he never even existed there. We, the victims, were reimbursed all of the money that we were owed, and then some. We were also allocated to new agents who treated us much better than D ever did. The case was pretty serious, and the entire agency had to update everyone on policies, urging us to speak out if we ever witnessed or were victims in similar cases. It felt empowering to know that R and I were mainly responsible for making the agency a safer place. If you're ever wondering how D ended up, I'll update you. He got charged with multiple cases of assault and sexual misconduct, as well as other smaller cases he racked up over the years. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison without the option of bail. Does anybody else think that, considering how awful and off D was from the start, that it's almost just flat out disappointing that it took all that action and all that buildup before somebody tried to report them to somebody above D's head? I'm just wondering why it had to be this major bombshell before anybody ever reported it. And our final story of the day is gang revenge. I joined a gang in my teens. I didn't need to. I came from a middle-class family. I had both my parents and they were really present in my life. I joined because I was stupid and rebellious. My parents didn't know what to do with me, even though they tried their best to reach me. I eventually ended up in prison, and even that wasn't enough to wake me up. It took my mom getting sick while I was inside to finally let me see the light. I'd been in for a while and had to do some unpleasant things to stay alive, but eventually I was able to jump out and work in enough good behavior to get paroled, but it was too late. My mom died before I could show her that I'd changed. Before I could tell her how sorry I was for everything I put her through. The whole time I was inside, my neighbors took care of her. They were an elderly couple who used to babysit me when my parents worked late. I heard the old lady visited my mom every day. The old man would always tell my dad not to give up on me and that I would eventually come around. He even visited me a few times when I was inside. I moved back home with my dad after my release and went to thank the old couple for everything they had done for us. The old lady wasn't doing too well herself, and it seemed like any day now it was going to be her turn. There weren't a lot of people at her funeral, just some of her friends, my dad, and me. The old man had had her entire casket covered with flowers from their garden. The two of them had the most beautiful flower garden on the street. As long as I knew them, they were working on that garden together. After she was gone, he went back to working in the garden on his own. I was struggling to find work because of my record, and my dad had to work away from home a lot for the travel pay. I didn't have any friends anymore, and I really didn't want to go outside, so I spent a lot of time just watching the street from the lounge window. I started to get to know the neighborhood pretty well. I started paying particular attention to one kid down the street. Not for any weird reason, I just saw a lot of my old self in him. He was a menace, especially to my neighbor. For some reason, this degenerate lowlife, I know it's rich coming from me, was tearing up the old man's garden at night. What's worse was the next day, the old man would quietly go about his day fixing the damage without saying anything to anyone. I wanted to tear this kid's legs off, but I knew that everyone knew about my record and it'll be bye-bye parole, so I waited. 1 week in a month, his parents would leave him alone at home to go to wine country, and that was when he would go and destroy the garden. I needed a weekend when both my dad and his parents were away so that I could teach him some manners. I had to make sure that I prepared myself well. I collected supplies, made recordings of what I needed to say, and watched the street. Then the weekend came. His parents left, and so did my dad. I went to my basement and got everything ready and waited for nightfall. Like clockwork, he came around 11 p.m. His rampage didn't take long, so I only had a few minutes. As soon as he was done and making his way back home, I jumped him in the dark shadows between the houses. I drugged him and carried him to my basement. When he woke up, he was properly blindfolded, gagged, and tied to a bed without his shirt on. I didn't have any soundproofing, so I made sure that his gag was not coming off. I had no intention of feeding him or giving him water. I wasn't going to keep him long, but I still wanted him to suffer. I pressed play on the recording that had a voice scrambler explaining everything that I was doing to him. I got out my tools and began using the skills I picked up inside. I wasn't concerned about being gentle. I made it hurt, but he was warned that the more he moved, the more I'd hurt him. The first few times he squirmed and even screamed, so I kept my word. He stopped moving after that. I was on a clock, so I couldn't take my time as I used to in prison, but I finished just in time to send him home before either of our parents got back. The old man's garden was never touched again. That kid spent a significant part of his life wearing long sleeves and not taking off his shirt in public. I had given him a prison resume on his skin, claiming that he belonged to gangs he was never a part of and had done things only the hardest of criminals do. If anyone in those gangs saw him with that ink, it was an instant death sentence. You know, as much as OP claims that they're reformed and they're so much better now, kidnapping somebody and putting almost permanent ink on their back that, if exposed to the wrong person, may try to kill him, who really is the bad person here? The one stomping some flowers or the one permanently marking a kid? Anyways, that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, click on that left video. Or, if you missed my latest video, click on the right. That said though, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.